Merry Christmas, everybody. Welcome back. Stealth the Unknown here, back at you again with another trigger mechanism to crack open and explain. We've got the AN-94 here today, which if you don't know is, call it Russian space magic, right? If you've heard of the G11, the Kraut space magic, it's a Cold War era rifle that fired caseless ammo. So if you take the cartridge of a traditional rifle like this, it's got a shell casing that holds your propellant, your primer, and your projectile. Get rid of the casing, right? And instead you compress your propellant into a cartridge, so you don't have to eject brass, right? So the G11 used brassless cartridges and fed them into a weapon system with a recoiling action. So if you see this, you've got your receiver. We'll call the system that recoils in this a subframe. So the G11 has a subframe with all its firing mechanisms in it, and it fires 3 rounds before you feel a recoil impulse. With this rifle, this is the Russian response to that concept. This fires 2 traditional cartridges, just 2 rather than 3, traditional cartridges before recoil is felt by the shooter. Realistically, it's not really that, but what you perceive is close enough to that you can consider it recoilless first shot. Anyways, let me demonstrate what that 2-round burst looks like. So I'll slow the simulation down and you'll see. Notice that second round made it out of the barrel before this whole system struck the back of the receiver. So I'll do that again. There's 1, 2, boom, and there it struck the back of the receiver. So that allows you to, you can even get rid of gravity and turn this off. You'll see it's not 100% because obviously this whole system has to be spring loaded, so as it goes back it does push a little through the spring into the receiver, but for better or worse the deviation is tiny between the first and second round. Oh, if we can get it to work. Here, try again. There's the first one. Yeah. So, like in real life, this isn't the most reliable. So we saw it there. Do it one more time. So it hardly deviates at all. It does deviate some because you can't cheat physics, but the deviation is so minor that you may as well call it recoilless for that first shot. Anyways, let's explain how it works. Alright, so you have a receiver, obviously, and then you have that subframe that I mentioned that reciprocates back and forth. Traditional AK style bolt and bolt carrier. I don't have the bolt and bolt carrier separated here, I have them combined for simplicity, but imagine that those are separate. So what I mean, you have a bolt which locks up against the cartridge, right, feeds that into the chamber, and a bolt carrier, and the bolt carrier slides back and forth around the bolt, which allows it to lock. On this, it's all combined into one piece, but there's a reason why you would need this on the real thing, and I'll get to that later. But anyways, traditional AK style-ish bolt and bolt carrier, but a little different from a traditional rifle. You have a pulley and pulley wheel, and that pulley pulls on what we're going to call a conveyor. I'm going to call it a conveyor because that's what Forgotten Weapons called it. And what it does, the conveyor, rather than letting the bolt strip rounds from the magazine, the conveyor does it for it. So that pulls rounds forward out of the magazine when the bolt is recoiling. So when the bolt's going back, the pulley causes the conveyor to pull forward. The bolt carrier itself doesn't actually have a recoil spring pushing it forward or a return spring pushing it forward. Rather, the conveyor has a spring pushing it back. And because that's attached to the bolt through the pulley, that pulls the bolt forward, right? So the conveyor pulls the bolt forward. If I were to leave this like so, that bolt's not going anywhere. It's got to be let go to go back home. So you've got the subframe, you've got a bolt and bolt carrier that's driven with a traditional gas piston, you know, long stroke gas piston like an AK. You have the conveyor. Rather than a traditional hammer, you have what's called a slide hammer. So imagine kind of like a striker or like the bolt on an open bolt gun. This gets held to the rear by a sear, and instead of swinging like a traditional hammer, it slides forward, hence the name slide hammer. Does the same thing though, just uses inertia, kinetic energy to hit the firing pin and dent the primer and sets off a cartridge. So that's pretty simple. The trigger presses on something we'll get to in a second, presses down on this piece we'll call a sear, that releases the slide hammer. And then in a second we'll discuss the firing logic that makes it do the little 2-round burst thing it just did, or the one shot that it'll fire here in 1 second. Right, so how does it do that versus firing the hyper burst like this, and then stopping versus firing the hyper burst like this, and then continuing on at a reduced rate full auto. So if you didn't know, it jammed, but I'll be with that in a second. The AN-94 fires at 1800 rounds a minute while it's firing burst, and then continues in full auto at 650 rounds a minute. So it fires faster than probably the fastest submachine gun when it's firing that burst. Why it can get away with feeling like a single shot. And then it fires like an AK afterwards in full auto. So it's a ridiculous rate of fire for those 2 rounds. It's unworkable for any other rifle, right? It's just too fast. It gets away with that because the mass of the bolt carrier and bolt, as well as the slide hammer and the conveyor, is very small, right? So it's like half that, a third that, compared to a traditional bolt carrier. So it's less mass to reciprocate, so it moves faster. That's how it works, right? More mass to the bolt, the slower it moves. So let's tear into the terrifying bit, which is this stuff that's going on here. So I don't know if you noticed this, but the selector moves forward and back rather than rotating. And this isn't representative of the real thing right here. I think the real thing actually is positioned further back, but it does the same thing. You have to press down on the selector and slide it forward or back to put it into the position you want it to be in. So all the way forward is single shot, just like in real life. All the way back is full auto, just like in real life. Right in the middle is 2-round burst. And you have a separate crossbolt safety. I can't obviously use certain directions in Algodo because it's a 2D program, but that's a crossbolt safety, right? That qualifies. It's close enough. Functions mechanically in the same way. It just blocks the trigger. Anyways, so you have the trigger. If you notice that shape, it's just got a hook on the front of it, right? It doesn't have a particularly complex shape. So let's imagine we rotate this. We're looking at the back of it. That hook isn't centered like this. It's more off to the side. So when you press the trigger, hook comes down on the side. So if we're looking towards the back of from the back of the receiver, what the trigger is pressing on is called the connector. So imagine it's a piece like this, and it rotates. It actually rotates like this. It's actually a little smaller in real life. So this is your trigger. You know, you wrap your finger around the back side of it there and pull towards us, and that would cause this side to rotate down, causing this to rotate down because it snags it like that. I don't know if this is making sense, but basically by pulling the trigger, it causes the connector to rotate like this, right? Releasing the trigger rotates it back up. I can't model a rotating bit here, so rather than rotate, this connector actually just slides up and down. It works. As well, there's one other piece inside the sear, and that's your disconnector. Literally, this is reminiscent of the disconnector of like a, was it the Luger P08 that used one of these? Yeah, I think it was the Luger P08 that used a spring-loaded pin disconnector. So your sear, let's say your sear's here, it holds your slide hammer. Your disconnector is a little pin sitting in the bottom of it like this, and the connector, the piece that the trigger rotates, has a lip that sits on top of it. Now because this pin, the disconnector, is spring-loaded, it can collapse in and get past that lip. So imagine you press the trigger, your connector rotates, the slip comes down. That's gonna pull the sear out of the direction of the slide hammer. So this whole thing reciprocates back with the subframe. But I don't know if you noticed, but the connector itself, so like what's holding these two surfaces, doesn't move with the subframe. So the result of that is the disconnector and the sear actually move past the connector. So as a result, your disconnector can actually slip past this surface on the connector, which allows it to snap back up when the time is right. Just like that. Notice it turned red though. That's representing the spring-loaded effect, right? So as I said, the disconnector is spring-loaded and can pop in and out of the sear. But when it turns red over here, that's what's happened. It's gone in and it's under this piece, which represents this green surface. So this surface is the timing surface for 2-round burst and single shot. So you notice it moves forward and back. That would be single shot. There's only enough time there for the disconnector to get a push for 1 round. It's recoil timed, right? So it's not a hard mechanical system, no levers and switches per se. So rather than the Boolean logic of traditional trigger systems, this is timed. So if your ammo deviates in power, you can get 2 rounds in single shot, or you can get single shots in 2-round burst, or you can get 3 rounds in 2-round burst. Like, it all varies, it all depends. So it's dependent very much so on the balance of properly tuned ammo, properly tuned springs, and everything being the right mass. If anything deviates, it's not going to work 100%. If you go look at Garantham's video, he covers the AN-94. They get several 3-round bursts through it when they shoot it. So it's a finicky system. Anyways, this surface right here. So we were talking, you get single shot when this is all the way forward. Well, notice when it's all the way to the rear, that red surface now actually sits above the disconnector. In 2-round burst and otherwise, it doesn't. So what happens, in full auto, the disconnector can actually hit that red surface and only trip when everything's all the way forward. So you get your 3-round or your 2-round burst at the hyper rate because of this surface. But then it snaps up, catches the slide hammer, and then only releases it off of this. The explanation isn't Englishing well. So I've recorded and re-recorded this a few times to try to optimize it, save time, not make it drag out too long, but I always feel like I'm missing something. Anyways, I don't know why I released the mag. So the 2-round burst, this surface times the engagement with the disconnector for 2-round burst or for single shot. But then this surface, when the subframe gets sent home, will trip the sear at full auto. Only when the trigger's held though. So you get 2 rounds just like this. Oh, actually that's semi-auto, right? Yep. So there's only enough timing here right now for a single shot. So snap up about here, right? Just like that. But in full auto, get enough engagement there that when everything gets sent home, it'll drop the slide hammer and fire another shot. So something else, you might be wondering, hey, wait a minute, how is it firing that second shot without it firing out of battery? And the answer to that is, it kind of isn't preventing it from firing out of battery. Rather, the slide hammer actually rides the bolt carrier forward and fires kind of like an open bolt. And this goes back to what I was saying earlier, how I didn't model the bolt and bolt carrier separately, how it's just a single unit. Well, in real life, this matters, because if the slide hammer is riding the bolt carrier forward, like it just did, if it doesn't have separation from the bolt, it'll be riding the firing pin forward. It won't deliver enough energy to fire when it closes. But because there's that closing action, so to say the bolt and bolt carrier slide over each other, right? So the bolt and bolt carrier go into battery, the bolt mates into the barrel, starts locking up. The bolt carrier still has a little bit to travel, and because the slide hammer sits behind the bolt carrier, that's what prevents it from hitting the firing pin until it's all the way home. So when I saw the animations, that confused me. I thought it was just kind of slam firing. That's basically because it is. For that second shot in the 2-round burst, it is effectively firing like an open bolt weapon. So the slide hammer just slips right past the sear. There's nothing to hold it back until the last minute. It just rides right on forward and hits that second round and fires it immediately. But it works in the circumstance for that specific purpose. That 2-round burst actually works. Even if the rifle doesn't seem to. Okay, anyways, I'll recap everything one more time. So, you press the trigger presses down on the connector. Connector rotates, and the surface that presses down on the disconnector causes it to rotate the sear out of engagement with the slide hammer. Slide hammer therefore swings forward, or slides forward, hits the firing pin, fires around. Gas pressure gets diverted upwards. Yes, I know you saw this too. Probably thought it was a gas tube, but it's not. Gets diverted upwards, driving the bolt carrier back. Bolt carrier attached to the conveyor via the pulley pulls the conveyor forward, which strips a round from the magazine. That places it on the lifter to be chambered by the bolt once it comes back in the battery. The firing logic for the selector is controlled by the timing of the connector and its engagement with the disconnector, which is this piece right here. The disconnector is a spring-loaded pin on the inside of the sear, just like how it is in a Luger P08. And because it's spring-loaded, it can snap in behind the surface that tripped it until that surface is released. So you'll see here when it turns red, that just means it's collapsed behind the green surface that dropped it initially. The red surface catches it. So if we go back to our little example crude diagram, right? So we go back to our sear, slide hammer, disconnector, connector lever, right? So what that red surface is, this guy, so when this is collapsed in behind the connector, there's another surface that has a ramped edge on it, which will push down on it again. Does that make sense? That's why the angle on it is like this. So this is sitting behind this surface. This can collapse behind this, but inevitably this will catch it if it's in full auto. Does that make sense? If it doesn't make sense, let me know in the comments, and I might upload another video kind of going over it a little bit better. The hard part is I had to figure this out for myself. Nobody explained it to me, and I'm not exactly sure how confusing, non-confusing this is to anybody watching, because it clicks in my head. I already understand it. I don't understand how you're going to perceive this watching it without any prior information. Anyways, if you have any such concerns, leave them in the comments for me, and I'll try to be timely. Oh yeah, since we're on it, this tube just holds the spring that returns this. I don't know why they didn't go with a compression spring from the back. Maybe they wanted to leave room for the firing components, and everything assembles out the front anyway, so it kind of makes sense. But yeah, it's a tension spring which pulls the subframe forward rather than pushing it. Yeah, anyways, thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed. Hope you learned what you were looking for. If you have any comments or questions, concerns, if you didn't get the information you were looking for and want to know more, please leave a comment in the comment section below. I do check my comments even if I'm not always the fastest about it. I try to be pretty quick. And if you've got a question, a legitimate question or concern, I will be with you relatively quickly. And if I have to make another video, I'll do it. Anyways, this is your Christmas present. Hope you enjoyed. Hope you learned what you wanted to. And hope you have a good New Year's. Thanks for watching.